the Interesting Conversations with Interesting People podcast series with author Nigel Beckles.
Welcome to the podcast.
Please like the podcast and subscribe to this channel. Thank you. The very best way to promote your podcasts. Podpage makes it easy to create a podcast website with just a few clicks. Every page is optimized to be found on Google and it stays up to date forever. For more information, visit podpage.com. The future of podcast promotion.
Have you experienced several failed relationships or been through a divorce? How can you avoid making the same mistakes again? How to avoid making the big relationship mistakes is out now.
Hi, my name is Nigel Beckles. My book is packed with practical and common sense strategies that you can use to make better relationship choices.
Now you can discover the dangerous myths about love. If your relationship expectations are realistic, why you could be falling in love for all the wrong reasons.
How to avoid making the big relationship mistakes. It's a book that could change your life.
Available from amazon.co.uk. Kindle version also available.
Author Queen P. When the mood is right, a poetry journey, mood swings, and when the mood is right, a rebirth. Books available on Amazon and all good bookstores.
Hi, I'm Queen P. Please join me by tuning into my poetry podcast, The Royal Affair, on Spotify, Apple, and all other similar platforms. You can also listen to the podcast on the Helium Radio Network on Saturdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You have entered into The Royal Affair.
Get ready for takeoff.
Welcome back to my Interesting Conversations with Interesting People podcast series. My guest for this episode is a man who has experienced an abusive relationship with an alleged covert narcissist, American Frank Caminita. Hi Frankie, welcome back to my podcast series. You were a guest on my podcast back in January 2021 as part of my Men and Relationships series. So how have you been doing?
I've been doing really well. Thanks for having me back. I know it's been, like you said, a couple years since we last done this. But no, things are going really well.
So for the listeners who are not familiar with your story regarding your ex-partner, what happened?
I think the same thing a lot of men go through after, a number of years. Things weren't going well, and can you do this for me? And spiraling out of, just spiraling, like, what more can I do? And being confused and lost. And ultimately left and was with other people, and we had kids, end of a marriage, the whole bit.
So during our last interview, you discussed being abused. So when did you realize you were actually being abused in a relationship?
It was, I actually didn't realize it in the relationship. I realized it after the relationship had ended.
Well, that's quite common actually with many men and women that I've spoken to, that they try and make sense of the experience after they've left. Although it's not widely discussed, men can be abused. So in your situation, did you seek support or did you talk to anyone about it?
Once I had the realization of what was actually taking place, and you have that, the relationship ends, you don't have your day-to-day life changes, you find yourself with a lot more downtime. And in that early stage, your mind is going a million miles an hour. You have so many questions, so many frustration, bitterness, and all this stuff. And after, maybe a week, things kind of started becoming a little bit more clear. You can reflect on it. At that point is kind of when I started doing some research, stumbled upon some support groups, got in touch with a counselor to try to walk me through what was going on, seeking that validation. I'm not actually crazy.
So during our last conversation, you had decided that your ex-partner was a narcissist. How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, after everything had kind of ended, and it was maybe a couple of weeks following, I think the normal response is to try to find answers. And I started deep diving into the rabbit hole of narcissism and discovered that there's actually more than one type of narcissism. The more common one for men, as an example, grandiosity, which generally manifests in their, big shots in public, but physically and mentally abusive in private. That's kind of characteristic of that. But the covert one is arguably, I would think, the most destructive and sinister one of them all, because you're not even aware that it's happening. It's But it's like chipping away at your soul little by little. You didn't do this. If you did this, everything would be okay. So then you do that and it's not enough. And so they're gradually chipping away at who you are until the last step comes, the discard. And that's when I realized, I was like, man, you don't even know what's happening to you. People around you can see it and they'll even tell you, like, what are you doing? But you justify the behavior. Well, like I wasn't being the best and I could do better. And you're making all the excuses for this other person.
Yeah, the term for that is insidious.
Yeah.
It's very sneaky of abuse because basically they just chip away at your self-esteem.
Yeah, it's the craziest thing because you just don't even know what's happening. And then after the fact, you question, when you talk about it initially, you feel like you're the crazy one. You feel like you're the crazy one. Like you're convinced at that point that it was you're the problem the whole time. And that's why I think the recovery part is the self-reflection and being alone and taking care of yourself. I think that's like so important. Read books, get your mind sharp, get your body looking good, realize that you actually are valuable, especially in the dating marketplace. You have to come to those realizations to really be, I think, healed and happy again. Otherwise, you're in a constant state of hypervigilance. The last time we spoke and leading up to this, it's been experiencing that abuse, but the recovery is really the part that I'd like to talk about. It's been really interesting that after some time goes by and enough, self-reflection and talking to people and realizing that it's a more common thing than you think, you realize you're not alone. And that in itself is a big, giant relief, knowing that you're not the only one dealing with this. And then, like I said earlier, learning about yourself, recovery, dealing with it now, you just feel at, on the day-to-day things where maybe like if you went through something like this recently or experienced it relatively recently, you still feel kind of lost. What am I going to do? The house is quiet. You got off of work, you're excited to get home, and you get home to an empty house. What now? But being at peace, one thing I've realized is like, man, it's nice spending time with yourself. And when your head finally does clear up from all the brain fog, start working on those goals again. What do you aim to achieve your work? Any health goals, other things to occupy yourself? So for anyone, if I had to say anything to anyone who might be listening or experiencing that, just keep going. Just keep working on yourself. Read books. It's a lot better. I think a lot of men get caught up in this trap of jumping right back into the dating scene. I think a lot of before they actually do the work, healing themselves and growing. That's the biggest thing. You got to grow from the experience. And I can arguably say this is probably the happiest and most fulfilled, I'll say. This is the most fulfilled I've ever been.
So what key points did you learn from your experience?
Now that it's been a while, I learned a lot about identifying those kinds of behaviors. I'm happy to say I feel really like well recovered. I don't have that lingering stuff that you experience for a year or two after the fact. And what I've learned more about myself than anything, not just identifying those behaviors and stuff like that. You kind of figure out, where did you go wrong? What did you do? What signs did you ignore? What behaviors did you allow? And where someone may not have had, and I'm speaking for myself, didn't have clear boundaries set, for example, things that you just kind of let slide to keep the peace and that kind of thing. So I started to really self-reflect, figure out what I do want.
Yeah, I think personal boundaries are very important. And of course, paying attention to any red flags. So why do you think many guys struggle to express their emotions?
I'm not sure that they actually struggle to express their emotions because it's not something that I didn't struggle with expressing it. It's expressing it to the right person. And I think, just the way westernized civilization is, and I think a lot of women, maybe even unconsciously, whether it's conscious or not, they turn out weaponizing that stuff against you. If you do communicate it, it comes up later. And then, it only takes one time for that to happen for a man to say, oh, I'm never telling you crap again.
I think that's very true. And I think there are a lot of guys as well who are reluctant to actually speak to other guys, like their friends. It's because they're scared of being judged. You're not masculine enough, you're weak, etc. And also you have to bear in mind that the suicide rate for men is 2/3 plus higher than it is for women.
There's this whole, the red pill movement, basically. I think we see a lot of that stuff going on, and it's really a positive thing. I know there's a lot of backlash and controversy with some of the things that are said, but I think it's a good thing that finally men's mental health is kind of now at least being discussed. And I see that like there are some Facebook groups and other avenues where men can both be vulnerable and in typical, like men, we like to clown on each other. We like to talk trash to each other. And it's actually therapeutic. You know, it really is. When someone can make fun of your struggle, you can have a laugh about it with another man. So men are a lot more supportive, I think, than what you fear. I think a lot of men do have a kind of a fear or an ego thing preventing them from communicating and wanting to talk about what they're going through. But being a part of a couple of groups and just witnessing what's actually going on, I'm relieved, honestly, that actually men are talking. And I do see that a lot of men are waking up and creating those boundaries and knowing what they will and won't deal with.
Well, I think that's a very good thing. So you said you've recovered now from your abusive relationship experience. So what's your current relationship status? What's your situation?
I'm married to myself. That's I'm married to myself. You know, I'm still single. It's been coming up on 3 years. I've dated, you know, going on some dates and things like that. But I realized that through the course of that relationship and that abuse, like we kind of mentioned, it's always, what more? I need you to do this. And you end up sacrificing, like putting your whole life to the side to try to please this person, to make them happy. And you neglect yourself and lose yourself, forget who you are. You lose your hobbies, your interests, a lot of friends, family, etc. After the relationship on those dates, I realized that I never really gave myself time to be with myself and to like kind of get back to what I want to do. One of the things you asked earlier, like one of the things, what have I learned? Self-care, taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's not selfish to take care of yourself. If you can't take care of yourself, how can you take care of anything else? And I would say that's one of the bigger lessons that I've learned.
Well, as the saying goes, you cannot pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
So, Frankie, what other interests do you have?
My kids and work, that's about it. I stick to the basics. I try to keep my house tidy, take care of my health, work out, diet, stay involved with the kids.
So when we spoke a few years ago, you were looking at setting up a Facebook group to support guys. Have you still got that going?
I did it for a while. I actually did forego the group. It turned into me like kind of growing a business, moderating, trying to grow it and stuff like that. And it really kind of started to become further and further apart than what my actual goal was just to be supportive. Like at the end of the day, I wanted to be an advocate for men, but I wasn't contributing. I didn't feel like I was contributing. And there's already so many men's groups out there. I found that it wasn't really giving me the satisfaction that I was looking for. I wasn't achieving what I aimed to achieve by starting the group. It became more about growing the group than actually providing value to men who needed somebody. I just started being more active in groups that already exist, and making more local friends and doing some outreach, just like, hey, you're going through this. If you need somebody to talk to that has a similar experience, XYZ, I'm here for you.
Well, I think a lot of people don't realize setting up a Facebook group and keeping it going can be very time consuming.
It wasn't just the time consumption. It was just that, you know, when you're in that initial recovery phase, your brain is like all over the place. You're like trying to fix yourself. You got these questions. You're not completely healed on your own. And then navigating that with trying to separate that part with growing a Facebook group and then being supportive of somebody else. It's like three totally different mindsets. When you're in that recovery part of it, you're barely capable of putting yourself together in the morning. So it was just all overwhelming, managing a group or whatever. It wasn't my goal. My goal was to be there for other men and have some advice. Say, hey, look, I did this, because I see a lot of men in these groups saying, I don't know what to do. Maybe I should just do this, 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 and this. And I'm like, yeah, I tried that, buddy. That doesn't work. So you can scratch that one off the idea list.
Well, I started a Facebook group a couple of years ago, Male Survivors of Relationship Abuse. So it's been ticking along. But yeah, it's been interesting.
There's a lot of value in that group. There really is a lot of value. And I'm in the group. I've seen plenty of guys post and are engaged and seeking help and telling their story. A lot of the men are like, yeah, You know, I see you, I'm experiencing the same thing. So I think it casts a bright light on what's really going on.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, Frankie, how can people contact you?
You know, reach out to me on Facebook. I'm in the group, you know, at Frankie Caminita. Send me an email, a.caminita04@gmail.com if you want.
Frankie in Louisiana, USA. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Please join me, author Nigel Beckles, for interesting conversations with interesting people, featuring interviews with award-winning authors, relationship and life coaches, therapists, and a wide variety of people with intriguing stories to share. Interesting conversations with interesting people.
Please follow author Nigel Beckles' podcasts on Amazon Audible, Spotify, and all major podcasting platforms. Thanks.